Sorry.
Here we are. Welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance. I am Dahlia here on the East Coast. Joined with me is the lovely.
I'm Katrina. I'm on the West Coast, and we both own metaphysical shops and actively work with clients. So, what we try to do is to give you an idea of what's happening on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and in between.
Yes, there's a lot of commonalities that come up. So if this is your first time on the show, definitely hit that like and subscribe button and share your experiences with us. This week has been it's been a slow week. It almost felt like time slowed down. And I know there are people out there in the metaphysical world that deal with like timelines and things like that. And so you'll often hear, at least I tend to notice it. So you often hear me reference like, oh, time was fast. It was slow. It was because oddly enough, I think that we take our signals from what's happening globally. And the interesting piece here for our show is that we're going to bring you some common themes that were coming into our perspective stores. So, where we find ourselves today is the experience of others. So, I absolutely love learning under Katrina because she does not it's very hard to find a teacher that doesn't limit you to their perspective because in all sense of the word compassion, they may only have that perspective to teach from and don't want to move into other areas. But what I appreciate about you, Katrina, is the opportunity to think differently. So we had a great class on that on Sunday, and
We did. That was good.
I mean, it was amazing. The teacher of that, she knows who she is. Absolutely amazing. And if you're watching this, love you. um, but it was a repeat theme throughout the week. Even yesterday, I found myself in conversation about others and their viewpoints and perspectives and how culturally it is not common to embrace other people's viewpoints. Other people's viewpoints are a threat to what is known, and it's better to just to keep what's known. And so this conversation was really wonderful because we opened into this space of needing to listen more. And without bogarting this part of the show, I'll share
No, carry on. Carry on.
one of the ways I got to practice listening not only to myself but to another person was experiencing someone who I have my own personal traumas that I've shared about on the show, and this person actually is involved in one of the traumas that I have experienced. And so having a conversation with that person, I had to move out of myself and into first a safe space. And then what's in that safe space, and we're talking ethereally here, so moving into an ethereal safe space, and then moving into allowing compassion to come in, which we've talked about on the show. Sometimes compassion, finding it is a lot of work because you just don't have the bandwidth, not because you're an unkind person.
Hmm.
And it was new. Again, I don't know if anybody remembers how we experienced the beginning of the pandemic, but your brain is designed to slow things down when it doesn't understand. It feels like things are moving in slow motion. And so that was the experience, being fully present. It was like time stopped. And then even after the appointment, checking in with myself, okay, was there anything that I did or said, or going back over, did I hold proper space, and then what did I learn? And I offer this up as a conversation piece here because more than ever I think that we won't be able to avoid the discomfort. So Katrina had an interesting question for when we get into these spaces where there are people that are triggering us. Katrina, what was it that you were sharing before the show?
I'm really used to being triggered because I have a lot of them, and also because with the job that I do, I deal with a lot of different types of people
Right.
in different levels of discomfort or spiritual discomfort or crisis. And so I am used to having to slow down, like you talk about, and do kind of a compartmentalizing as I'm working with people. So if I start to feel something, I have to recognize that I feel it and then kind of put it aside and bookmark it and work on it later because my focus has got to be on the
Of
client,
course.
not on me.
Yeah.
And so I had a situation come up, and I'm trying to figure out how much of it to share. It was at a family gathering. Um, we often have because we have a very large family. People will bring their significant others with them,
Hmm.
and even if it's someone that they're dating at the time, but not necessarily engaged to, or whatever it might be. And this person that came um, identified as autistic and actually with a formal diagnosis of autism. And I consider our family to be pretty tolerant because we have a lot of neurodivergent people in our family. We have trans people in our family. We have my daughter's bi. I mean, we've got a lot of different spectrum of gender identification and sexual association and this sort of thing. So between my six kids and myself and Eric, we've all adapted a lot into new experiences of holding space for situations that are not our own or that we sometimes
Right.
even don't understand or can't relate to. But this person who identified as autistic was this is going to sound very Martha Stewart, very disruptive. And not that I need my Thanksgiving to be perfect, but we all had a very traumatic year. So we're all a little bit on edge. And we were in a very small home compared to what we're
Right.
normally in.
Mm.
Um, and so we were all trying to find a new normal. This was our first family gathering since the fire in August, and we were all just trying to find our feet. And this person that came with one of my grandchildren, which when you think about grandchildren, we think in 5 and 6 year olds. My grandchild is 18, so I'm talking about adults here. I'm not talking
Right.
about a disruptive 7 year old. Okay, but there was just a lot of very explosive laughter and loud discussion. The person had trouble with volume modulating, which I know is, sensory input and output is often an issue with autism, and I get that. But there were multiple boundaries crossed after requesting and trying to maintain boundaries. I prefer these pronouns, or, um, you know, interrupting and interjecting false information and then refusing to be corrected. And so it ended up that Thanksgiving was just a struggle for everybody. And I
Yeah.
mean, everybody except the people who arrived with that person, who messaged me afterwards and told me what a great time they had and they wish they could do that all the time. And meanwhile, the rest of us are just like having a panic attack, And
Yeah.
so I had some struggles as to where boundaries go with that sort of thing. Do you
Right.
have boundaries where you're saying I'm fragile, I'm not up for this. This isn't something I'm willing to do in a family environment where I'm supposed to be able to feel safe. I'm seeing a person bringing into the family dynamic an element that made the entire rest of the family feel uncomfortable. And one of the perspectives that was given is, well, it's good to stretch your boundaries. It's good to be tested. It's good to see where you're not tolerant. And in my mind, I'm thinking, God, how far down do you have to lay, in order to be considered tolerant? How much of your joy and happiness and comfort do you have to give up at a place that's supposed to be safe?
I think
And so, it got really uncomfortable, and there admittedly there's still some family discomfort and discord. It I think has caused some final breaks between some of my kids and how they interact, and so that it was just ugly. And I still don't know the answers to those questions, Dahlia. I still question the decision I made as a result of that. It's just still really uncomfortable. My
I
feeling
don't know.
was I have to create safe space for my kids.
Right. That's
And
exactly what I was thinking.
if somebody's coming into that who is new to the family dynamic and isn't allowing people to feel safe despite reminders, they got to go.
It
And that
it
was not a
seems like
popular decision.
it seems like the reminders are like the opportunity for creating safe space, right? It seems like the tolerance is in hey, we're in this together. I understand where you are. Here's where we are, where everybody else is, and
Mm,
it cannot be despite neurodivergence or whatever the case is. It cannot be that one singular person occupies the safe zone. It's just not,
yeah.
that's not community. And unfortunately there isn't really like a black or white option here for what was right, what was wrong, when I know I've been in a space with this emotional dysregulation where it seems like there's no door. And so when you throw in the mix 5 or 6 other people that are in their own closed off and closed in space, even the slightest, blip in noise or the slightest wrong touch is
Hmm.
explosive. I mean, it's a tinderbox, for everybody. And you know, to your point, it's a good. I think that tolerance, even compassion, I think we do and should have limits on some of these things because you shouldn't be stretched to the point where you're pulling apart. You shouldn't be stretched to the point where you dissolve into nothingness because you have to be the safe space. You have to be the creator of what connects everybody. I don't necessarily feel that that's possible, and I think it comes down to feelings. When you feel a shift, like I can say to my example, had I felt a shift in the experience, the session, it would have ended. And
Mm,
period, point blank, fully prepared to give any kind of refunds that were necessary. But
yeah.
you know one thing I know I've learned from you is if I'm not in an emotional space or have the bandwidth to support somebody else, I don't need to be doing healing. and
Hmm.
and moving into different situations, whether they are healing, whether they are um family gatherings or community events, there has to be like an exit strategy. And I think maybe that's the key here, right? I'm sort of
Hmm.
coming into this realization, like finding your line. One of the other topics we were going to talk about today is knowing yourself through these experiences.
Hmm. Hmm.
Where do you feel the expansion? Where do you feel like, okay, I've done enough. I've I've done everything that I can to expand. I'm not expanding further. I'm actually contracting.
Mm.
And so the exit strategy is I have
Hmm.
to go, or if, in the case it was your house, so you're not
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
So you,
Well, and when you
you,
mention the shift that happens, the switch, I have two clients in the entire history of me seeing clients that I have said, where I just basically banned them from the shop. Just I can't work with you anymore. And one was a client I had poured extensive energy into. I mean, I'd worked with this kid for over a year. And then he just straight out lied to me about a
mm,
tremendously intense and well thought out experience that never happened.
wow.
And he had shared this lie with a number of friends that we had in common, in order to see who his real friends were. And it was a really horrible experience. And when I recognized, which I did right away because it was badly done, but he wouldn't cop to it. But when he finally admitted that yes, he had lied, I just said, I don't want to see you again. I don't want to work with you again. Don't come to my store. I have moved heaven and earth for you as a healer, and have put up
Yeah.
with a lot of emotional discomfort with you as a healer. And for you to do that and behave that way as far as we've come, clearly I'm not having an impact, and I'm not going to be involved with anything else having to do with you. And that was really horrible. But I had another guy that he was very aggressive in seeking me specifically out as a healer after he heard me on Coast to Coast. And ultimately, he wanted me to magically work toward the extermination of the Armenian race.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
didn't know that. He was actually coming for some physical discomforts that he suspected were energetic in Genesis. And so it wasn't until I was working with him for probably a good 45, 50 minutes that all of a sudden this utter hatred just started flying out of him.
Oh my
And
gosh.
just about this particular race of people, and that they were dogs and that they should be shot in the street, and just saying the most horrific things. And I couldn't I felt very threatened because he was asking me, about my ethnicity.
Oh my God.
And was I sure that I was all white, and things like that. And I
Wow.
said, my husband is real. Eric was right outside the door, but I said, my husband is really the expert on the types of things that you're describing. I would like to bring him into this conversation. And he just hissed, no, you will not do that. And he blocked me from the door. And it was the only time in my entire, we're talking exorcisms, anything I've ever done, that I was genuinely frightened and feared for my safety in with
Mm.
clients. And
Right.
so I got him out the door and sent him on his way. Initially, I had told him that we would have 2 or 3 sessions. I contacted him right after that session and said no, that we would not be continuing, that I was absolutely certain I was not the person to help him with the things he wanted to do, and managed to extricate from that. But the switch, there is no other way to describe it. There is a switch that toggles when I shouldn't be here right now. This should
Right.
not be happening. And that's when those are 2 times that I really felt that switch of nope, we're done here. This is completely
Absolutely.
finished. And the finality of that, it was really intense.
The safety of it all too comes right back around. I mean, in the first scenario, you have a person who is actively creating discord because of their own insecurity and sense
Hmm.
of injustice in the world. And if they whatever space can be held for something like that, it has to start with the desire to change it. And if you would go so far as to seed plant in other people, you have no desire for personal change. You
Mm-mm.
actually are expecting the world to change around you. And I
Right.
think that, we as healers do run into that a lot. People will come in and say, well, I just want my circumstance to change. And further going into the discussion, there is an expectation that through the healing work, their mom will start, you know, listening to them. And, everybody's going to start picking up crystals and they're not going to feel like the black sheep anymore. And it's actually the reverse that comes to the table, but it is the reverse that comes to the table to say, like, it's you that changes, not
Hmm.
the external. But if there is absolute resistance to internal change, nothing moves. And that's not healing. And aside from keeping safe space, the level of integrity it took to just say, hey, I'm not the person for you. Like that takes a level of integrity and humbleness that can only create a pure connection of healing anyway. But again, he didn't want it. At least that's what it came across as. And then the second person, I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that. Overt unsafe space is all I could see. I mean, if you're going to, it's not as if it was even a fear of like, what's he gonna do? Not that's what I meant. It's not even a fear of like, oh, he might project something at me or energy or whatever. It's no, this person needs, this is all in my pay grade at that point. That's the only phrase I can really use,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and yeah, it seems so simple to say, I'm sorry you went through that, but this is sort of the nature of things, right? We, anybody that does this work, the potential of that kind of switch is there. And
Hmm.
mostly people have gotten really good at hiding that sort of thing. I mean, you
Yeah.
can see it in social media too. Like there are now covert words used
Right.
that seem harmless, and the intent is very much harmful.
Well, and this happened before COVID, which
Oh God.
really took people into such, this was a couple, 2.5 years ago. And it really took people into, COVID took people into such a position of vulnerability that they're lashing out and reactive. And so it was before any of that even. And so now we're in a much more delicate space of
Yeah.
trying to maintain the calm while people are in crisis.
Right. And priorities are taking and understanding yourself and your priorities are going to give you that personal integrity to report in your life to say, hey, here's my line and I'm not going past. It's going to say where those compassion and other types of boundaries are because they're necessary. I think at the point that we start saying, I'm going to let this person walk all over me, or I'm just going to do what they say, you're that's not compassion. You're being a doormat and you're creating additional trauma and wounds, not only for
Mhm.
yourself, but for the collective, because we're actively trying to move in the opposite direction. It seems to me that the line is to say, am I hurting myself? My mom likes to say this, and I know she got it from somewhere else, so I won't give her full credit, but as is hurting me or is helping you hurting me, and then moving through those feelings.
Mhm.
But when you know yourself, when you have those priorities, you have almost like an alarm system that will go off to say like, oh wait, we've crossed that line.
Yeah.
um and it's about developing that.
And I think it's interesting that people equate having compassion for someone to having to share space with them and having to
Mm,
sacrifice your boundaries in order to accommodate them. You can have compassion for somebody and not have to be in the room with them.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I really think that we are entitled to protect our spaces, especially our home space that's supposed to be our safe space, and not have triggering people there if we're not looking for a growth experience in that moment. And I was not
It's
looking for a growth experience at Thanksgiving. I was tired.
No, that's not the time. It's not. Like people think it is because you're together and you're never together, and it's really not. I
Yeah.
mean, and then historically, from the first one, there's conflict.
Yeah, and
It
lies
carries the
and
energy of right.
yeah,
So it's not the time to heal.
and
But it
abusers.
almost right. It all seems like you're actually offering compassion in setting the boundary, right? Because if somebody comes into a space, and I'm just not you necessarily, Katrina, but like everybody watching the show, if you're like, okay, I need to grow, I need to change, you're not ready, and or it's not the right setting, and you're trying anyway, people will feel that, and it takes away that level of force takes away from the very act that you're trying to put forward. And so compassion says, hey, you know what? I might psychically attack you while you're here because I'm defending myself.
Right,
Or,
right.
I cannot open up to you right now, and I don't want
I've got to have a
to.
t-shirt with that on it.
Right.
I might psychically attack you right now.
I
This
mean,
is
it
what
happens,
compassion looks
right?
like. Yeah,
I
no, it
mean,
does.
working in the healing field meant, at least for me, becoming more responsible for my thoughts. And when
Oh,
I figured out
totally.
how many times I was like, fling, 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 I was like, whoa, if you're going to do this for real, maybe just don't talk to that person. Don't try to put up with
Hmm.
them, because that's not what we're here to do. They will find another healer, they will find another friend, they will find another human being that can do better for them. I don't think
Well,
being in
and
this position makes us perfect.
I think that letting a situation where you try to make space progress into a long-term relationship of resentment because you've been trying to make space and trying to be comfortable and trying to force that, just creates even more discord than
Yeah,
if,
absolutely.
yeah. One of the things
um
that my son said to me that was troubling was that I had told him when I first met this person that I was uncomfortable with them. And he said that that bothered him, that just on vibes alone, as he put it, that I would disregard that person. And he said that there had been situations where he had been misread, that his intentions, that his overall, worthiness as a person, that his character had been misread by somebody, and just on the vibes that he gave off. Because he tends to be shy and a little bit awkward in social situations. And so people can misread that as being aloof or that sort of thing. And so that was what he equated it to. And I thought, and what I said to him was, dude, I do this for a living, man. Come on.
right, give me a little bit more credit.
I'm not
It's not
just,
just
somebody you
vibes.
met at a party here. Okay.
I
So,
think that
yeah.
I on that level of experience, right? Like, if we could pause here for a moment, I think in another show we talked about um how you can be triggered by somebody's energy field because of something they did, something, and it might have been in the past, but it's not resolved, it's still very much a
Mm-hmm.
part of who they are,
Sure.
or that they lack integrity within themselves, and it just doesn't feel positive. I mean, it's not about inacceptance at that point, I don't think, or at least it doesn't feel
Mm-hmm.
like it. I don't know how you feel into that situation. There's a difference between
Yeah.
inacceptance and what you're feeling.
One of the things I struggle with that I think is universal, but I'm not sure, is that I get uncomfortable if someone's mannerisms or their looks or something in their behavior reminds me of an abuser from my past.
Yeah,
And
100%.
so it's just something like somebody will hold a lighter a certain way and it'll trigger me back to someone who harmed me in the past. Or, someone will say a certain phrase that that person said. And I've always had kind of a weird thing with that because part of me says, you shouldn't blame a person you don't know or that you barely know for sins of the past of someone they don't know. But the other side of it is that signal a communication that your higher self is sending or has evoked to say, you need to watch out because this person has some things in common with that other person, and that's not something you ever wanted to encounter again. And so I've always kind of been on the fray with that about other people reminding me of prior abuses. And I think that that's one of the reasons that we get triggered by people. And it's a hard one to work with because I don't want to be responsible for something that, happened to somebody 20 years ago that I had nothing to do with.
Right.
But, it's somebody who looks like me or acts like me or speaks like me. and makes them uncomfortable. I've known people that didn't like redheads because a redhead was mean to them. Or I don't like Geminis because one lied to me. Yeah, you
I was
know,
going to say,
please.
everybody does it with zodiac signs. It's all got to be one group of people.
Right. So, Eileen is right. We're all always trying to do our own healing and such. But you know what? Sometimes when we heal people all day long, we just want to go home and close our eyes and rest for a minute and not do the hard work. And I have my moments where I'm just thinking, I just back off the lessons for just a minute. Let me breathe here because
Right.
I've been running the washing machine all day long for these people.
Well, and we've said before in the show, there's no length of time when it comes to healing. Time doesn't exist. So,
Mhm.
in all actuality, by giving yourself time to integrate what you just received as information is part of the healing process, right? It's you didn't have the awareness before, now you do. That
Right.
oh still hurts. I mean, I
Hmm.
can give you an example with my with an assault that I experienced in my earlier years, um, being triggered once a year, each year after that felt like, man, I'm not doing
Hmm.
anything to heal this. But it was that I was being given stepwise approaches
Hmm.
to the healing work. And I can tell you, it's still not done. I still have things like you were saying, certain mannerisms, certain things that will trigger me, and it's like, oh, it's a note, still got healing work to do.
Oh
Maybe
yeah.
now's not the right time. And like you were saying again, it's not the right time to do healing when you are supporting other people. So maybe it's just best to
Yeah.
to make a space between the two people.
Well, and I'm 60 years old. I've been doing intensive self care for over 40 years in terms of trying to heal and work through different things. And I've just come to the conclusion that it's like sweeping a dirt floor. You always want to get to that space where you've cleared your old patterns and reset all of your old wounds to be healed. And it just doesn't ever happen. You're constantly being returned to a new level of a hurt um, or sometimes you get to the place where you're thinking, wow, 10 years ago that would have been really difficult for me, but I barely felt it. So we do make progress, but I don't think we ever get to the place that we are just perfectly healed and all of our bridges are rebuilt and everything's happy. I think that everybody is always trying to learn uh, new ways to be in the world and not be triggered and not be hurt. And I think that, that's hard to do.
Absolutely. In my earlier years of spirituality, I'd come across Carolyn Mace's work, and I think I've talked about it before
Hmm.
with soul contracts, and found myself as I integrated that information, as I came across other things that, you know, to Eileen's point, we have work to do, we have inner work to do, and other people are going to bring that forward for us. And I found myself in the spiritual community hearing things like, well, what did you do to bring that into your life? And, what did you do to manifest that situation? And it seemed so cut and dry and limited. And then I found myself switching into a mindset because that way of thinking never seemed complete and whole. It just seemed like victim
Hmm.
blaming.
Yes.
Um, so then shifting into the soul contract space, I started to realize that yes, we do have soul contracts with people. Maybe the soul contract was, you and another person come together. It could be traumatic, but what you're supposed to gain is one person's supposed to feel empowered, the other person is supposed to gain compassion so that they don't cause harm anymore.
Hmm.
You are doing your healing work to feel the empowerment or to feel the lack of it, but that other person doesn't. Maybe they choose wrong. Maybe they choose like, finding compassion is just too hard and I am going for it. I am going to cause you harm because it's easier to do. It's what I know how to do. And then in that moment, it can't be said that you invited it or what have you, And hopefully, as we've been talking about in the show, you're able to create safe space between you and your harmful person, right? And yes, and to Eric's point, sometimes shit just happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't all have to be,
Yeah.
orchestrated.
I had somebody that was actually in a mentor position say to me once, you should never hold yourself out to be a healer until you have managed all of those triggers and all of those wounds. And I said, I'm going to stop you right there, because I don't believe, as I said, that we ever get finished. And if we do that, we will have no healers. If we make our healers uncomfortable with having their own triggers and their own reactions, we don't get any triggers. We don't get any healers anymore.
No.
And what we should hold out for is not a lack of triggers or a lack of pain or a lack of trauma that still needs to be worked through. We hold out for the space where we can comfortably have compassion and hold space for the people that come to us, whether they trigger us or not. We have to have that ability to, as I was saying before, note and set aside, hey, this woke up something in me. I'm going to work on that after this session. But right now, my space is here helping this client.
Right.
And then spend self time evaluating what that was that flew by. Was it momentary? Was it significant? What do we need to look at here? I usually, if I'm going to not work with a client, I can usually tell in the dialogue leading up to the appointment,
Yep.
because I don't just have people usually walk in off the street for me. I talk with them a little bit, or I'll email with them, and I can usually figure out there that maybe I'm not going to be a good fit for them and move them on to somebody else. It's not always something bad about them. It's just that I can feel that
Right.
this isn't my place of expertise or not what I'm supposed to be doing. But yeah, I don't think that we should ever aspire to necessarily be superhuman and not feel hurt or resentment or issues. We just have to be able to maintain that compassion if we're going to function as a healer.
Absolutely. And it's funny you use the word superhuman. Like what comes to my mind when I think about the possibility of healing triggers and not being affected anymore and all of that, I feel like at that point you die and
Yeah,
you leave and you start that shit all over again. You
yeah,
know, um, it seems that we hold our everyday American, societal standards to, the guru who sits on a mountain who doesn't have to deal with anybody,
right.
you know. And that's it's just not possible when you are enmeshed in other people and they're around you, when you're still dealing with family. And again, there has to be space and time. As a client came to my mind as you were sharing about the healing process, where we were doing the session, and I'm at the point in the session where I'm placing stones and different things in different areas, and I placed a stone down in one area, and the client went, "I'm really sorry, I'm not ready to deal with that." And how empowering that was. I wasn't like, no, you're here and this is part of the session. We worked together on it, because had we said no, this now that you feel it, you're supposed to do this, it would have completely dismantled everything else. And it was clear that everything else needed to move before they could tackle that thing. And this is part of the timing of it all, I think. So, aspirations, I think we've talked about this at length in the show, is balance and management. And then reaching back to support those who may have been where you were, not from a place of superiority or superhumanness, but more to say, it can be hard to see in the dark, and here's a flashlight I found. Maybe it'll help you, you
Hmm.
know?
You know, what I look at it as when we're talking about compatibility of healers and that idea of being a little bit further along the path is looking back at somebody and saying, there's a giant hole right there and you're running straight forward. I need you to pay attention and see that there's a hole there. Oh my God, look at the hole. Look at the fucking hole. and they're running and running like toward it. If they can't hear you, if I'm speaking English and they speak French, that doesn't
Hmm.
help. If they've got their hands over their ears, that doesn't help. And it's not that I'm wiser or smarter, it's just I saw the hole. Maybe I fell in the hole. I know that the hole is there. And so, again, it's not a leveling thing, it's not a superiority thing. It's just a matter of trying to guide people through the places that we know can be treacherous. And if you're not speaking the same language, you're not going to be of help to them. Everybody's going to get frustrated with everybody else.
Right. And to your metaphor, which was incredible visual, right? Like sometimes we fall in the hole and get real intimate with it. Like, okay, wait, there's a rock here. And look, maybe if I put some drapes over here, since I'll be here for a while, it's tolerable.
I'm not
But,
ready to fix this hole.
right? It's just going to sit here for a minute.
Just draft me.
Um, the sometimes language extends to not just foreign languages, but maybe you speak heart and that person speaks mind, and you
Mm-hmm.
cannot negotiate the feeling with somebody who's in their head because you just don't have the head language, you know. It can get very complicated, and the sometimes it's not even our place to convey it, right? Sometimes it's like, okay, the flare has been sent up. I even tried to fix some of the hole, but this hole is here for all of our transformation. Um, so, and again, I'll say, like Eric said, shit happens.
Yep. I have people that will say to me, very from a very mystical, new agey perspective. A lot of times it'll be students, but doesn't everything happen for a reason? Everything happens for a reason. And I'll say, yes, it does. But sometimes those reasons are just not very interesting at all. And sometimes those reasons don't have anything to do with you, except
Yeah.
very tangentially. It's very egocentric to believe that everything that's going on around you is necessarily about you. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's someone else's lesson that you just
Yeah.
happen to be a witness to. And, sometimes we are the agent of karma that is supposed to assist with that lesson, and sometimes we're not.
Yeah, absolutely. I that was definitely a theme this week, and maybe a theme every week. What past life is causing this issue right now? You know, I'm coming in because I feel like there's a tie, and it's like, okay, well, there may be, but there are also some very present moment issues that you are not dealing with, and it's interesting to bring the awareness of, hey, well, you know, in the moment when you didn't stand up for yourself in front of your boss, that was here, that was now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, maybe there was a time when you were oppressed in another lifetime, but you're still not making that choice now. You can't control that lifetime. I know that in healing work, as I mentioned, sometimes time doesn't exist, and we're working forward and all of this and that, but deal with what you can deal with, which is now,
Mm-hmm.
and stick to the steps that you can take in the present. I think that a lot of people get lost in thinking, oh, well, I had past life reading, now I'm aware, and I've had, past life healing work done, and then they just kind of mosey along without thinking, how is this tied currently? And then working on that. That's where the healing actually takes place, and
You're
how things
very, very
connect.
right. I can't tell you how many times I've had people coming in blaming everything's happening in their life on somebody else or on a past life experience, or I had a contract that I was supposed to learn this lesson this time. You know what? That might be so, but you made a dumbass decision yesterday, and that's what's causing what's happening today. There's no big mystery here. We don't have to unravel this beyond the fact that you've got a boss who's a bully, who's consistently asking you to do things not in your job description, and you're not willing to stand up and set a boundary and say, I'm going to do what's in my job description, and that's it. We've got people now more than ever that abhor conflict. They just can't manage
Mhm.
any type of experience that's going to be putting them in conflict with somebody else, especially an authority figure. And what's interesting is the biggest lack of conflict address that I see in my clients is with their damn kids. They won't do anything that's going to inconvenience their children and change the dynamic that they've set up. So they've got kids that are disrespecting them constantly, that are basically in control of the house,
Yeah.
and that they won't take back their home. They won't take back their lives. Somebody saying my son wouldn't let me drive the car to do this, this, and this. Well, who paid for the damn car? Whose name is on the title? We shouldn't be having these conversations. We should be having conversations about why you won't let your son drive the car.
Right.
And we're not seeing that. Instead, we're seeing situations where people are so resistant to conflict that they just let everybody walk over them. And
Yep.
that speaks to our initial conversation about the difference in compassion versus boundaries, and
Right.
setting up safe space for yourself. You can't
Yeah.
have a situation where somebody's telling you when you can and cannot use your car.
Right. You're not holding compassion at that point. No, well, they might be upset, and that's not compassion, it's fear.
Like you
A fear of
said, it's
losing them.
doormat. Yeah,
Right. And if fear is driving the car, love isn't employed. Compassion can't be involved with
right.
fear. They can't coexist. And yes, I've seen that scenario too. Most of my clients have like smaller kids, so it's less about the car and more about like,
Hmm.
oh, well, I was depressed, but I they needed to play right in that moment, and or I don't want them to see me sad. And having to have these conversations where it's like, you need to teach them to be a whole human being, and you give them a more balanced perspective for what's possible. I know I don't always, and I'm not like perfect parent and anything like that, but I know with my kids we have conversations. Mommy's not feeling well, and it's sad, and they'll ask why, and sometimes I know, and sometimes I don't, and then, when they're sad, we have something to reflect on. Hey, remember when I felt the same way that you did? Sometimes we don't have words, and that's okay. Maybe we can talk later. I'm not the perfect new age parent. That doesn't happen every single time. Sometimes it's just take a walk, go in the bathroom and lock the door, whatever. But the complete picture, I think, in what you said, is how we get to a place where we have those compassionate boundaries, where we have that is the very expansion that we started talking about in the beginning of this conversation, or at least it's a start, in my opinion. So there are what we've been able to touch on tonight. It's afternoon where you are. It always occurs to me when I say that, but it's nighttime here. Is expansion of ourselves through compassion, but still maintaining those boundaries so that you're not a doormat. Prioritize your safety. Find out about yourself so you know what your priorities are. And ultimately, you have a situation where you're not losing extensive amounts of energy. Because even as Katrina was giving the example of a boss, it's usually the little things that build up that then you turn around all of a sudden and there's tons of holes that you're leaking energy out of. And so, whatever the case is, and how we approach life, how you all approach life, there is space for compassion. Two things can coexist at once. I'm always saying that to my partner. Two things can coexist at once: safety and compassion. And they're not butting heads. They are, in fact, working together when you have to create space between you and another person, or even if you're not ready to force yourself to look at something and do the work. You're offering yourself compassion in that moment. So I think we've this has been like a both a light and heavy topic, right? As we've
Yeah, it
moved through
has.
these. So with all of that, we've given you guys a lot to ponder. We loved your audience participation, and we look forward to checking back and seeing your comments, and share with us, different stories. Maybe in the next coming week you find yourself having to implement both compassion and safety, and we'd love to hear how you move through it. Perhaps you add to what we understand of those topics in those moments. But with that, we hope that you guys have a great evening, and we'll see you next Thursday. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Bye.
Bye.